Wayne Hsiung. Wayne is an animal rights lawyer, former faculty member at Northwestern School of Law, and co-founder of the Simple Heart Initiative. He has led, sorry, he has led teams that investigate and rescued animals from factory farms and slaughterhouses across the globe, and has organized successful campaigns to ban fur in San Francisco and California. He served as lead counsel and sometimes defendant in 5 right to rescue trials, in which activists were prosecuted after being charged for giving aid to sick and dying animals, garnering media attention from the New York Times. He is also a co-founder and former lead organizer of the grassroots animal rights network Direct Action Everywhere. I will pass over to you, Wayne. We've got 15 minutes.
So first, thanks to everyone for being here. When I got the invitation for this, which came from an email I didn't recognize, I was like, why are these people inviting me to speak from the UK? Don't they realize I'm a criminal? And then I found out Roger Hallam was behind all this. I was like, all right, I get it now. You guys want criminals around. But honestly, my journey to being a criminal is an interesting one because I never saw myself as the sort of person who would break the rules. I really, frankly, don't see myself as someone who wants to break the rules. And yet about a year and a half ago, I was facing, I think, my 6th trial for rescuing a beagle from a laboratory. 15 years in prison for taking a blind beagle out of a cage to a veterinarian and then to a home where she was loved, she is loved, and she will be loved for the rest of her life. If you understand how the hell we got to the point where I was facing multiple felony charges, which in the United States, I know in the UK, you don't have felonies and misdemeanors. In the United States, a felony is a very serious charge. It's like a murder, a gang violence, that sort of thing. In fact, they often use a lot of the gang statutes to go after activists in the United States. How do we get to this point? Well, the vivisection industry, like the fossil fuel industry, is extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily intertwined with the US government. Tens of billions of dollars of funding from the NIH goes to the vivisection industry, and they've created this revolving door between the titans in industry and the people who regulate the industry. The vivisection industry has enormous command of public opinion because they're seen as experts. So back in the early 2000s, some very good friends of mine, merely for running a website against vivisection, and for those of you who don't know, vivisection is a term that was originally used by animal experimenters hundreds of years ago, but they stopped using it because they didn't want people to know they were literally vivisecting, dissecting animals, and sometimes without even giving them painkillers. But the vivisection industry has such commanding power over public opinion that in the early 2000s, some friends of mine who were just running a website against vivisection ended up in prison for between 5 to 7 years. I mean, you read about the case. It's called the Shack case, SHAC. My good friend Lauren, some other friends of mine served between 1 and up to 7 years in prison for merely running this website. And they've been very successful at cracking down on any sort of dissent as a result, because it turns out people don't like to go to prison. They don't like to face millions of dollars in restitution. And so for years, a lot of the activism was very much on the down low, it was very underground. The ALF did a lot of actions against vivisection, but it was all very sort of cloak and dagger. In 2017, we did something very different. We just walked into a vivisection facility. In fact, one of the largest vivisection facilities in the United States. They torture thousands of dogs every year. Over the decades, since the 1960s, they have cumulatively sent hundreds of thousands of dogs to a horrible death. And we decided to just walk in, take pictures of everything we saw, and start taking the dogs out. So we did. And as you might imagine, given the openness of our action, they cracked down very hard. And in 2024, I faced trial. Many of the most experienced lawyers I knew said this is extremely dangerous. This is even different from factory farming. This is an industry that has, unfortunately, a lot of support even on the left. A lot of these industries, the fossil fuel industry, the factory farm industry, the progressives, the greens, they tend not to like those industries. So we at least have some allies. But the vivisection industry is a hard one because the left likes the scientists. We like, the people who are trying to cure diseases. We like vaccines. We like medical treatments. And so a lot of lawyers I talked to said, you got to take a plea deal. In the United States, you could take a plea deal, basically beg for mercy. Hopefully you don't stay in prison for the rest of your life. And a lot of them were saying, please just take a plea deal because this is a different sort of ballgame. And something very interesting happened. On the first day of trial, they dropped all the charges against us. And now we're standing here a year and 6 months later. And the very facility that was trying to send me and my friends to prison for over a decade announced just a few weeks ago, it is shutting down permanently. Okay. So you might be wondering, how the hell did this happen? This is a strange story. It is a strange story. And I could go on and on about how wild this story is because it is a pretty wild story. But I'm going to take a little bit different and surprising angle to explain how this happened, how we went from facing a very unprecedented prosecution where we had openly defied the law and we're facing a decade in prison or more, to having a very unprecedented victory. And the angle I'm going to take is a mathematical angle. It is this chaos theory. So this is how we won. But if you don't know what chaos theory is, it's a discipline under mathematics that explains what seems unexplainable. So the most common example of this is the butterfly effect. You know, a butterfly flaps its wings in Indonesia and somehow there's a hurricane in the United States, sometimes weeks later. And the funny thing about chaos theory and the butterfly effect is they're actually real. There are some circumstances where very small forces can lead to very, very large outcomes. And there's extensive analysis, not just in mathematics and physics, but in the social sciences about how these very small changes can lead to very big outcomes. And certainly what happened to us is an example of this. I think other than me, probably even the other actors on the team that rescued the beagles from Ridglan Farms did not expect a very small and somewhat risky act of taking a blind beagle out of a cage would lead to a shutdown in one of the largest vivisection facilities in the nation, and a national crisis for the entire vivisection industry. And that's exactly what happened. And what the mathematics of chaos theory and the butterfly effect teach us is there are two different components of this campaign that allowed us to make the repression against us backfire and create pretty transformative change. Okay, what are these two components of chaos theory? The first is a concept called a feedback loop, right? A feedback loop is best illustrated by feedback you might get in a microphone, right? There are some instances where you have a system where whatever you input into the system comes out and gets inputted back into the system. There's a cycle, right? And all of us have seen this or heard this in the context of a microphone and a speaker system. You whisper into the mic, might be a very small initial sound, but it goes in the speaker. The speaker replicates it and it goes back in the microphone. And if the microphone is close to the speaker, that tiny little whisper can turn into a massive ear-shattering shout before you know, right? And this phenomenon is an incredibly important one for activists to understand, because very often when we think about campaigns, we just think about that first action. We're going to whisper into the microphone and hope it has an impact. If we get ourselves embedded in the right feedback loop, even small actions we take can fuel cycles through feedback loops that create massive change. So that's concept one. And I'll explain how this applies to Ridglan and what we did to make Repression Backfire in just a moment. The second concept is a concept called exponential growth, right? Exponential growth is the concept that in some cases, when you're trying to change something, the more effort you put into trying to change the world in some way, there's progress, but maybe the progress diminishes. And this is actually typically the case. When people work on campaigns, usually the more you work on it, the less effective it gets. And eventually it's not effective at all, right? Maybe vegan outreach is an example of this, whatever it is. I mean, name your campaign. We've all seen diminishing marginal returns. If you're lucky, you might get linear growth, right? That consistently, no matter how many times you go out and do this form of activism, you get the same results. And that's usually what you hope the best for, right? And that's something like direct animal rescue. Like every time you rescue an animal, we rescue one animal gets out. We rescue two animals get out, and so on, right? But what you really need to be looking for if you're trying to capture the magic of chaos theory is instances of exponential growth, where every time you put more effort in, the output gets even larger over time, and it explodes and eventually becomes something like that feedback loop in an audio system where a mic is too close to a microphone. Because one thing about that system that causes this ear-shattering, screeching outcome is the speaker isn't just amplifying or repeating the sound. Like when you whisper into the microphone and get a speaker to put out some output, it's creating exponential growth. It's actually amplifying the sound beyond the input that you put in. So I might whisper into it, and it might be just a little bit louder, but it's not linear. It's certainly not diminishing the volume that I'm putting in. It's increasing it. And if you can get to a situation where you have exponential growth, a tiny little whisper can quickly turn into a massive, powerful shout. Okay, so let me explain what this means in the context of Ridglan and how we organize this campaign in a way that may help activists who are thinking about how to withstand repression. We knew going into this campaign that we had to create massive change with relatively little effort, partly because we didn't have tens of billions of dollars. We didn't have the government at our backs. We didn't have an entire ecosystem, political, cultural, media ecosystem, constantly telling everybody that vivisection is totally fine, it's appropriate, it's necessary for human life. All the things people say about the fossil fuel industry, about the factory farming industry, the vivisection industry in many ways has an even stronger immune system than all these systems. We knew we had to take a very small amount of effort and create a large amount of change. And we knew that the only way we're going to do that is to think about feedback loops. So when we thought about our campaigns from day one, we also thought about day two, right? Assume we achieve what we want to achieve in day one. How is what we achieve on day one going to feed into day two? How's our victory on day one going to strengthen our campaign in day two? And if we didn't have that, we didn't do the work. It wasn't pointless because we're going against this massive system that's constantly going to repress and clamp down on and silence and suppress any efforts we made. And we often see this as social change efforts, right? Even if you achieve something, it gets swallowed up by the ecosystem. There's so many pressures, so many different countervailing influences that prevent your change that you thought was such glamorous, glorious victory from getting swallowed up by the system. For us to combat that, we had to create a feedback loop and solve the problem of making sure whatever victory we achieved in day one fed into a bigger victory in day two. So, and this is just a mistake that people often make. And I frankly see it in some of the animal rights trials and environmental trials I'm seeing today. Repression can be a gift, but only if you have a plan for day two. So I imagine all of you, when you go out and do some direct action, you know a trial might happen and you know you're going to win or you lose. Do you have a plan for what you're going to do? How you're going to use that outcome, whether it's a win or a loss? And frankly, we've won cases, we've lost cases. In all these cases, we always have an answer to the day two problem. We know how we're going to use, whether it's a victory that can set a precedent for the future, right? So when we win these cases, and Ridglan isn't the first case we've won a lot of cases. We say to the world, this shows the public agrees we have the right to just rescue these goddamn animals from these factory farms and labs. In contrast, when we lose, we also have an answer to the day two problem. We can say, this shows how corrupt the industry is. The fact that someone's going to prison for taking an animal to the veterinarian is a travesty. It's an injustice. In either case, we've created a feedback loop that allows the outcome from day one to feed into day two. And I think all campaigns should try and solve this problem. But here's the other piece that I think Extinction Repellent and Just Stop Oil and a lot of the folks in the 822 network have harnessed very effectively. And this is how do we create exponential growth? Well, typically when people are thinking about social change efforts, they don't think about the growth potential of their campaign. They think about its initial public reception, right? When we're trying to ask ourselves, oh man, how do we convince people to go vegan? Or how do we get people to stop using fossil fuels? Or whatever the question is. We think about what's public opinion today. But actually, if you look at historically successful campaigns like the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s or the Gay Rights Movement in the United States in the 1980s, these campaigns don't think about what the public supports today. They ask themselves, what can we convince the public to support tomorrow? Where can we create growth? In fact, public opinion for the Civil Rights Movement, again, Martin Luther King Jr. is whitewashed, very famous, heroic. We would have a holiday, like a government, I think you call it a bank holiday in the UK. We have a bank holiday in the United States. Everyone goes home on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But in 1963, when they marched on Washington, you know how much the public supported them? Less than 30%. Over 60% of Americans said, these guys are dangerous, they're wrong, we got to stop them, right? But the thing that King realized is unpopular tactics are often the best tactics if we can create growth in them. It's not about their current public support, it's about the potential for growth. And that often means starting with a very unpopular tactic, but realizing we think we can actually win people over once they pay attention to this cause. But also realizing the main objective of these campaigns isn't to win public support now, it's to build momentum in an activist. What is going to inspire the activists? Instead of asking how many people in the random public can we convince, we ask the question, how many activists will this inspire to work for the movement? Because that is what's going to create growth. And that's exactly what we saw at Ridglan. You know, initially, this ragtag group of 6 people didn't have much support behind us. First, people didn't know about us. And second, when they heard about the campaign and what we had done through the government and from the industry's PR machine, they thought these are terrorists, they're evil people. But some people heard about it. Dog lovers in Wisconsin heard about it. They thought, wait a minute, they're not terrorists. They took a blind beagle puppy to the vet. How could that be terrorism? And they saw the sacrifices were made, and a lot of people stepped up, including non-traditional animal rights activists, all these dog and cat rescue groups. One of the most prominent supporters is the largest dog rescue group in Dane County, where this facility is. And they jumped on board and started writing letters on our behalf and saying, this is ridiculous. How can this possibly be the case that this man who took a blind beagle puppy to the vet is a terrorist, right? And that is momentum. That is not current public support. That is, who can we win over to become deeply committed to this cause, who will fight in the future and allow the movement to grow? And that is a very different question. So I think I've gone about 15 minutes, but I'll just quickly summarize again. I think the way you make repression backfire is you have a plan to create a feedback loop by solving the day two problem. The concept here in chaos theory is a feedback loop, and the answer for us is day two problems. How do we ensure whatever the outcome is today, we feed that into the activism tomorrow? And if you don't have a problem, you have an answer to the day two problem. Every campaign, if you ever get a campaign memo or a set of goals, and you ask the organizers, okay, what do we do after we win? And they don't have an answer for that, then keep asking questions until you have an answer. Because you're not going to create the feedback loop you need to do something like shut down a place like Ridglan Farms unless you've answered that question. What is the answer to the day two problem? And the second piece of this is don't worry about current public opinion. Don't worry about your reputations today. Ask yourself, how are you going to build momentum tomorrow? Ask yourself, is this campaign going to inspire activists and not, is it going to antagonize public opinion today? And honestly, I think this is one of the geniuses of Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. They realized we can do a lot of crazy shit that a lot of people might think is cringe or might even be opposed to. But if it's inspiring activists, we can do a lot with that. We can create momentum. We can see exponential growth. And again, that's a concept, exponential growth in chaos theory. And if you have a goal of achieving exponential growth, the way you know you're doing that is you're asking yourself, not how popular is our campaign, not what is public opinion today, but do we have momentum that can change public opinion tomorrow? All right, so I think I'm about 15 minutes. But I love all your thoughts because honestly, people in the UK are doing way cooler shit than what we are in the United States. So tell me what you're up to and what we're doing that's wrong. I will say shutting down Ridglan is pretty cool because this is a place that for decades the government has completely ignored. For decades, again, I mean, people used to go to prison. There are a lot of people went to prison for doing the sorts of things we did. And not only did they not charge us, we shut the entire place down.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And you've reached your target. Not a single person left the call during that
Yay!
time. So
Success.
success. Okay, so just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please put it into the chat, into the Q&A, and we will come to them shortly. So I have some pre-planned questions here, and but I think there's actually something that I want to ask, and I'm using my right as the host here to do this.
Oh
So
shit. Oh shit.
I think you're I think what you're saying is super powerful, basically, that but I think the reason why I think a lot of people get stuck in this, let's go for this incremental small win,
Mhm.
rather than let's go for this big thing, which is a chaos theory. We're going to roll the dice, we'll take the risk, and I'm going to risk like personal suffering because you risked a huge amount. You risked going to prison for a long time, at the off chance that this would work. And so I think I'd like to just, if you've got anything to tell us about how you maintain the courage of accepting this uncertainty, that you know that you need to do this to win, you know you need to do this to win something big, but how did you keep the courage and the faith that you were doing the right thing in that moment?
Yeah. So one thing is historical parallels. If you look at the history of social movements, I mean, Frederick Douglass, 160 or so years ago, said there's no rain without thunder, right? You can't get the life nourishing kind of social change you'd like to see if you're not willing to bear some risk and bear some pain. And this is just tried and true in every social movement kind of I've studied in history. That whether you're talking about gay rights activists who were beaten, hospitalized, sent to insane asylums, whether it's women's rights activists like Susan B. Anthony, who, when she tried to vote in the 1890s, they put her on trial and tried to put her in prison. And obviously, the civil rights activists in the United States, this is the most famous example. I mean, it's almost become like the less religion is the civil rights movement. We all know these stories. And I think if you infuse yourself with that purpose and realize, look, who among us would not want to march on Washington with King, would not want to join Rosa Parks on one of these buses? Who among us would not want to be with Susan B. Anthony when she tried to vote, right, and was put on trial for merely asserting her basic rights, asserting her basic dignity as a human being. And the question for us is, do we want to be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history? If we want to be the right side of history, then step up. Let's go. None of this like fence sitting, right? And I will say, I think the most important thing to understand the sacrifice is to have that purpose, and that brings a joy to your work. Like, honestly, being in jail is one of the most joyful experiences I had. I'm not saying there weren't a lot of painful aspects of it. There were painful aspects, and I've been in jail in and out for like most of the last 5 years because of all the times I've been put on trial. But it has been a very joyful experience too, partly because I know my purpose. I have this deep sense of purpose. And if you meditate on that purpose, if you read about that purpose, if you're part of a community of purpose, right, that helps a lot. I will say, I think the flip side of that is important too. Understand this is a responsibility. I mean, so when King wrote his letter from our Birmingham jail, so does everyone know this letter? You all know this famous letter. If you haven't read it, go read it. What's wrong with you? In fact, just leave. I want you to leave. I'm going to consider this a failure. I'll accept the failure of this Zoom call just to get someone to read this letter, because you got to read this letter. What most people don't know, because again, this is the whitewashing of King's history, is the letter from a Birmingham jail was not written to white racists. It was written to moderates who were fence sitters, who were not willing to join in direct action. He wrote this letter because he saw the fundamental stumbling block of the effort for civil rights as not the white supremacists who were gunning down people on the streets, like Bull Connor, who literally set police dogs. He cracked John Lewis's skull, fractured his skull. They beat people for no reason. He saw those people not as the fundamental stumbling block, but the fence sitters. And I think if you're one of those fence sitters, and I'm not saying everyone has to sacrifice in the same way. So I totally understand if you've got like 6 kids, you've got a disabled parent you're caring for, your sacrifice might not be going to jail. But King's point was the same that Frederick Douglass made in the 1850s. There's no rain without thunder. You got to get off the fence and realize we have to sacrifice. We have to put our own necks on the line if we're going to create change. But the other thing about that's key is the word we. It's not I have to do it. It's we have to do it. And one of the reasons jail was not just tolerable, but really transformative and positive experience for me in a lot of ways was because I was part of a community. Honestly, it got to the point I was getting so much mail that I was a little afraid the other inmates were going to target me because I'm so bombarded with letters. And I'm not saying this is going to happen to everyone, right? Because obviously I'm a notable figure in the anti-rights movement, so I got more mail. And I think it's actually one of the things that the UK is doing worst is when people have been incarcerated, other than a few notable figures like Roger, I worry about these other activists because I see the amount of support and attention the other activists are getting who are going to jail. And I worry about that because the only way for people to understand the importance of their sacrifice is that they're part of a community. And for us to be part of a community, we have to realize it's not about Roger, it's not about me, it's not about Harley, it's about all of us. And if we understand that, then any one of us who has to sacrifice, that might be going to jail. That might be donating a little more money than we used to be comfortable with. That might be working late hours in the middle of the night when you otherwise might not want to do that because you know one of your friends is going to jail and you know you got to get this comms memo out. You want it to be perfect for them. Whatever your sacrifice is, as long as we sacrifice together, it feels fucking great.
This is fantastic. Thank you again. Brilliant answer. So one of the pre-written questions we have here is at the moment we're seeing stronger pushback from governments, and this is basically seems to be true all over the Western world. Stronger charges, greater surveillance, more aggressive prosecution. How should the movement adapt as the repression escalates?
This is probably also going to be a surprising answer to everybody other than Harley, because I've talked to Harley about this. But I think one of the unexpected answers is God. And I don't mean any particular theistic belief. And let me actually just back up and explain what I mean by that. Part of the reason the civil rights activists and the women's rights activists had that sense of community and support when they went on trial was because they were part of a church. And the thing that bound the church to its members and bound the members to each other was a sense of greater purpose that they called God. And, God can mean different things to different people. I happen to be an atheist Buddhist, and my sense of God is the miracle of consciousness. All conscious beings deserve dignity and respect and safety and love. And sometimes that awes me to the point I'm in tears. Like this morning, even just thinking about all the turkeys. In the United States, we have this incredibly horrible holiday called Thanksgiving, where tens of millions of turkeys are killed on a single weekend. And it's evil and awful. And I was watching some video footage of just these little baby birds and the struggles they go through, but the joy they go through too when they're safe, when they're with their parents. And for me, that is God. But knowing that other people believe this binds us together in a way that oftentimes these leftist progressive activists just don't have. Um, and the civil rights activists had this. King was a minister. And he knew when he marched on Washington, when Rosa Parks got arrested, he knew when he risked his life, everybody who was part of that community, everyone who would come to his kids' birthday parties and graduation ceremonies, all the families who's who who grieved with him um, as their minister when their family members died, they'd all be there for him when he was in jail. And that's exactly what happened. When we got the letter from a Birmingham jail, a lot of the people from the church, and not just his church, but all the other affiliated churches, they all came out. And Susan B. Anthony was a Unitarian. She was like a progressive member of a church called Unitarianism in the United States that always considered itself Christian in the original context, which is revolutionary, progressive, fighting for the rights of the prostitutes, of the inmates, of the Gentiles, and the people who are different, right? They saw themselves as Christ-like in the OG version. They're like the OG Christians. We got to be like Christ as he was in 0 AD or 32 AD or whatever year he was when he was killed, not as he's been whitewashed today as, prosperity gospel. We're going to get rich and shit together. And I think part of what will create that sense that we can do this together is finding some shared purpose and scaling that up to the entire world. So, I'm in a seminary right now for that reason, because I'm trying to explore what are the great narratives, the great stories in history that can bind us all together in a movement for change.
So I think that leads on to a question that we've got, the final pre-planned question here, which is, so I think this unity of purpose is lacking in the climate movement in a way which it isn't in the vegan movement. Because they have this, even if vegans aren't conscious of it, there is a spiritual element to veganism, like the acceptance
There
of
is.
other beings having this right to life, of other beings being equal to us in this in this profound way. And I wonder, the question we have is just like, how can we bring a number of people from the climate movement into this kind of mentality, into this
Yeah.
understanding of animals as deserving equal respect? Because
Yeah.
it's often not the case, is that people in the climate movement see animals as part of the solution.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with the concept called the identifiable victim effect, make yourself familiar with it, because anyone who's trying to create change needs to understand this. And the identifiable victim effect is basically this, that something that otherwise is a tolerable injustice that no one really cares about suddenly becomes not just intolerable, but a desperate, urgent cause that everyone in the nation has to think about when you move from abstraction to identifiable victims. This is kind of what Black Lives Matter did with George Floyd, right? It's what happened in the civil rights movement with Rosa Parks, right? Instead of just saying, oh yeah, there's this policy, it's really messed up, all these Black people have been exploited, suddenly there's a face, there's a person, there's a story. And if you know kind of the history of humanity, I mean, storytelling is just so crucial to who we are. It is literally probably part of the reason why our brains evolved the way they did, why our vocal cords evolved the way they did, to create such complex forms of communication, so we could tell stories about each other, about our meaning, our purpose, and so we could bind each other to a common cause because we tell a story about who we are, what we believe in, what we're fighting for. But again, it's really hard to do that with abstraction. It has to be concrete. It has to be individual. So I've gone on the record, and I'll say this again to all climate activists, that the only hope for the climate movement is for them to join the animal rights movement. Because at the end of the day, fighting for something called the climate, what the fuck is the climate? I don't even know what the climate is. I mean, most people don't. I mean, they have a sense of what it is, but they don't care about it. There's no face, there's no story, there's no tears cried about the climate. It's just an abstract concept. But you tell them about a polar bear who goes out into the Arctic, swimming miles, leaving her cubs behind, fighting through cold water currents, going to hunt in the spaces she's hunted for millions of years, and the ice is all gone and she drowns to death and leaves her 5 babies to die of starvation in her den. People imagine what it's like to be that mama. They imagine the suffering of that one living being, and they are apoplectic. They suddenly go from thinking about an abstraction, these woke people have gone crazy, They're thinking, oh my God, there's a mama who's drowning. She swims out into these ancient waters and finds all the ice is gone. And she just like swims out and drowns to death, literally, because there's nowhere else left for her to rest. That is how you create an identifiable victim. And the identifiable victims of the climate crisis are the animals of this earth. And, it's funny because we talk about impending climate catastrophe so often in climate work. But I wrote a paper in 2006, a long time ago. This is my first published paper as a scholar about how the climate catastrophe is already here at the existential level when it comes to the non-human animals. There are literally tens of thousands of species, a record number of species in the year 2025, committed to extinction or in danger of extinction in the year 2025, a rate faster than has ever existed in the planet's history. Asteroids, volcanoes, all these horrible things that have happened on planet Earth. Nothing compares to what we are doing to the Earth today. But we're not telling the stories of those individuals. And until we start telling those stories, which means getting embedded in the animal rights and understanding the issues, getting involved in the campaigns, whether it's factory farming, wildlife, whatever it is, of the individual identifiable victims who are going through some form of suffering. I think that's how we're going to convince people to take climate justice much more seriously.
Okay, thank you. And I've got a question here from someone in the chat. If people want to ask questions, please put them in the Q&A. We've got quite a bit of time left, and we've got just one question in the chat. So please put more questions in if you have them. Now is the time. So we've got a question from Bean Sprout, which is, why did the vivisection company close down? Was it just because of public opinion?
Yeah, I didn't really explain this very well. Yeah, so what happened is the prosecution against us failed because, again, these local groups, again, a lot of just normal people, non-activists, started hearing about this and they were horrified by this. And so the public relations of the case became so bad, the company decided it would basically have to drop the prosecution. That's why on the first day of trial, they just said, we're dismissing the entire case. Please go away, go home. But again, we had a plan for this. We knew, first of all, when they dropped the charges against me, I actually filed a motion that probably has never been filed in the state of Wisconsin history, opposing their dismissal of the charges. And I said this in court. I said, if this is the only way for the animals to get their day in court, then come at me. Let's do this. Let's roll. And I oppose you dropping the charges against me because this has been the only way we've been able to convince a court of law to give this case some attention. And that caught a lot of attention on social media and the mainstream media. There was a local firestorm. And we knew that there was a mechanism in the law that we could use with all the public attention for support and in conjunction with some local animal rescue and dog advocacy groups to petition the government to turn the tables on Ridglan, the company. And that's what we did. We filed a petition for a special prosecutor. The petition was granted. And even before the investigation closed, there was such a reputational crisis around the government, the industry, and the collaboration between the government and industry that the company just voluntarily chose to shut down just a couple weeks ago. There probably would have been criminal charges filed against them, but that is the pathway specifically by which it happened. You could follow my Substack, simpleheart.org. I've got a lot of blogs about this. But again, I think that the specific tactical reasons it shut down were less important than the fact that from the day we started this, we knew we were not interested in just rescuing a couple of dogs. Obviously, very important objective. We believe in that objective. I still believe in that objective. It's one of my great joys in life that Julie is out of that cage. We knew our objective was not even just to win in trial. Like obviously, I'm glad I'm not in prison. I'm glad we won the court case, but that wasn't our objective. Our objective was to free every animal from the planet Earth. And we knew that once we won that trial, we had a day 2 campaign and strategy to move from the momentum of dismissing the charges to going on offense to take the company down. And frankly, we have an objective for what we do after we win the Ridglan campaign too, because there's an even bigger vivisection facility. In fact, the only vivisection facility that's bigger in the state of New York, where I am right now, that is next. That we take the precedent of Ridglan and go after the single largest vivisection facility in the entire United States next, showing that, look, if Ridglan is a criminal company, then Marshall is too. And for those of you who don't know, there's a branch of Marshall in the United Kingdom. Some folks at Animal Rising are going in trial in early 2026. We definitely want to coordinate with them and make sure the attention of the world is on this vile, evil industry in early 2026. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're already in the process of doing that now. So that's shorthand how we got Ridglan to shut down.
Thank you. I think this leads on as well then to the next question we have, which is from Flippy, which is, can you speak of loopholes in liberation activism, like being acquitted of a crime if you uncover mistreatment? And I think we could potentially add on to this the right to rescue becoming a legal
Yeah,
principle through this.
yeah. So I'm going to tell you right now to change your language because it's not a loophole; it's our legal right. And I think even the tone we take internally is very important in this regard because one of the ways you turn a loophole into a legal right is by believing it yourself. So there were a number of specific legal arguments we've used in these open rescue trials. So, for example, one of them is that if the quote unquote property stolen has no commercial value, then you can't be convicted of theft. Another is this provision of Wisconsin and California law that requires specific intent to commit a crime, which often requires the prosecution to prove that you knew your behavior was unlawful or at least immoral, right? And we set ourselves up by saying, look, we had all these legal opinions. We consulted with legal scholars. We had written blogs about this. We believe this is our legal right. But and there's similar technicalities and quote unquote loopholes that I know activists have used to win recent trials. Even the Grand National trial that unfolded this last week is an example of that. And uh, but fundamentally, I think what you're trying to do, rather than just find a loophole, is transform the entire legal paradigm by saying the legal system is broken, it is corrupt, and this little thing that you might call, or a judge or a lawyer might call a loophole, is a little crack that's going to open a wide open flowing waterfall in the entire system because you are going to point out how this entire system is broken. And this might be the little gateway through which we're going to reach the jury and win this outcome. But our real goal is to transform the public understanding of the entire legal system, which then affects judges and lawyers too. Because one of the things that I think a lot of non-lawyers don't understand is that the law that matters is not the law of the books or the law of the courtroom. The law that really matters is the law of the street. And there's actually a very famous legal philosopher from Oxford, H.L.A. Hart, who first wrote this. That fundamentally what the law is what the public recognizes as the law. It doesn't matter what a judge says. It doesn't matter what's on a piece of paper. If the public decides something else is the law, if the public, for example, decides that non-human animals are persons, then they are persons. And suddenly all the rights and liberties that human beings receive must be granted to non-human animals as well. And that is fundamentally up to us. And so yes, there are specific loopholes, the value argument, the intent argument, the honesty argument that or dishonesty argument that's going to be used in the right to rescue trials in the UK. But fundamentally, the bigger point we should be making in the public at large and culturally is that there is a much more important, much more crucial narrative about what's happening in our system that this trial and this particular legal argument is just a vehicle for delivering. And in the case of the animal rights movement, that narrative is every animal who's suffering deserves to be rescued from pain. I got to go in like 2 minutes, by the way, because I got activism I'm doing this afternoon, actually. But
We can maybe just do a closing statement then.
okay.
But yeah, thank you so much. Do you want, yeah, is there anything you want to say just to sum up the things that you've been talking about in the last couple of minutes?
Well, I'll say two things. One is follow me on the Simple Heart. I'd love to hear from you and get more feedback and criticism, simpleheart.org. And the second is, the 10 words I leave almost everyone I talked about activism, which is find your voice, find some friends, and fight like hell. If you follow those 10 words and you find other people who will follow those 10 words, we're going to change the world. Let's go do it.
Amazing, thank you. You've given me a lot of pep and energy um, for what was feeling like a bit of a grueling week I have next week, trying to do exactly this. So
Good
yeah,
stuff,
thank you very
Harley.
much, and good luck with everything you're doing this evening, and keep going with the fight. So
Yeah. All
thank
right.
you
Bye,
everyone
everybody.
for coming. We can do a round of applause, but if you want to do a round of applause, just do it silently in your room. and we will send it spiritually across.